Suppose you got in a time machine and you traveled back to the era not so many decades ago when the world was ruled by newspapers. When newspapers did have gossip columns, but when the author of the gossip columnist would have to answer to a lawyer who would inspect the gossip column before it was published to make sure they weren't going to get sued, to make sure they weren't guilty of defamation, when there was a stated formal procedure to make sure that editorial opinion didn't just cater to saying what the audience wanted to hear. If you traveled back in time and talked to someone who was living in that era when the newspaper was king, and you said to them, hey, in the future, the media is not going to work this way. Not at all. That barrier between the editorial role and the audience, it's going to disappear. The audience is increasingly going to take over the role of editor and curator of mass media to their own delectation. Oh, yeah, that barrier you have between professional journalist and amateur member of the audience, that barrier is going to disappear. The barrier has come down on both sides. The audience has risen up to write their own content, generate their own articles and so on, write their own gossip columns on the internet. And on the other hand, I think we can say professional journalism, bad as it ever was, has eroded away, where the professionals really have no advantage over the amateurs these days. Anyway, in as much as anyone is still earning a living as a professional journalist. It's very few people get paid by newspapers anymore. If you traveled back in time and you confronted someone with this vision of the future, someone who was living in the past, in that era, with that technology and so on, they probably would respond by imagining a science fiction future in which people are tremendously forgiving and understanding and accommodating about one another's moral lapses. Because then, in that future, it wouldn't just be a few stars in Hollywood who get gossip published about them, who get, denounced in the editorial pages of the newspapers, in the gossip pages, in the society column of newspapers. Well, every man and his brother would be subject to the same censure. Even if it was just that you live in a small town and you're a drunk and everyone in your small town is posting on Facebook complaining about what a drunk you are. Well, you still have to live with that now, don't you? The mechanics of how that goes on. The perpetual Spanish Inquisition of all against all. The morality policing, omnia contra omnes, of each individual against all the others. The gossip columns, without end, without direction, without editorial, without a legal department to answer to. You might think this would generate a tremendously tolerant, sympathetic, sensitive society. Nope. At the moment, in the year 2020, we have a society addicted to the adrenaline rush of morally judging someone else and feeling superior to them. Controversy of the day involves a young man, Titanic Sinclair, and an even younger woman named Poppy. Poppy was a rock star on tour, with her band, playing shows, and she slept around. Why do you think anyone even becomes a rock star and goes on tour? Morally, why would I be inclined to judge this, or why would I get on some kind of ego trip judging her for this behavior? And if you're going to judge her for it, why don't you look at the whole history of rock stars and musicians? It's just mind-blowing to me that this is even a topic of moral opprobrium in the 21st century, given that what we're talking about is all consenting adults, so to speak. Okay. As far as I know, they're also even sober consenting adults. We don't get the normal problems with drug addiction and alcoholism and later regrets, for that reason. There was another case, I'm not going to give the name or get into details. There was another case of a guy being denounced on the internet because he and his wife together went on a cruise ship. And on this cruise, on a boat, they invited another woman to come back to their cabin on this boat. These were all middle-aged people, okay? These are all boring middle-aged people, right? He's on a cruise ship with his wife, and they invite some other woman to come back to their cabin and have a three-way. And again, this story, which isn't that salacious to begin with, is even less salacious because apparently the woman just said no and that was it. Nothing happened. Like, it wasn't like there wasn't anything dramatic. She declined and everyone got on with their life on that cruise ship. When I heard this, I was like, why do you think these boring people go on cruises to begin with? Like, why do you think they're spending their time in a cabin on this boat? I mean, these aren't people who are fascinated with oceanography. These aren't people who are out there to look at the waves. Like, I don't care. But it's like, okay, a rock star on tour with the band sleeps around with, I don't know, some fans or some other musicians. News at 6. I mean, is this even worth talking about? Boring middle-aged couple signs up for a cruise ship vacation, is interested in having another person in their cabin on the vacation. Mind-blowing. I mean, if this didn't happen, how the hell would the company sell tickets for people to get on a boat that goes nowhere? I mean, by definition, this is a round trip, all right? Sure is great sitting on the deck of this boat, looking at the water. Sorry, I mean, it's not like they entered into a yachting competition or a catamaran speedboat competition or something, okay? You're sitting on this ship doing nothing. You can read books. You know what? To be honest with you, you really can't read very well. The motion of the boat. If you want to read books, go to the library. There's a reason why they call it a cruise. But the role of the audience, this rapacious audience that has taken over the editor's room, that's taken over writing the newspaper, and that, so recklessly and so greedily is always looking for a new target for condemnation, apparently just to make themselves feel better about their own mediocre lives, their own lack of ambition. I don't have any other explanation for it. I mean, there are other explanations, like Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Probably all these people grew up with religious beliefs that are just radically incompatible with biological human life on planet Earth in the 21st century. Really, if you look past the glossy surface in any century. I mean, guess what? Napoleon Bonaparte cheated on Josephine. Josephine cheated on Napoleon Bonaparte. You can call it polyamory. You can call it an open marriage. Right? In every century, go back to ancient Rome, read The Secret History, and so on. All right? The reality below the glossy surface that society presents, and normally what people want to write down on their tombstone or in the history books, human biology hasn't changed. Human biology is not going to change. Human ideology is going to change. Culture is going to change because it has to change. Okay? Titanic Sinclair. Everyone wants to line up and judge and condemn Titanic Sinclair. He started being the boyfriend to Poppy when she was 19 years old. You got to have maturity. You got to have detachment. If you choose to date someone who's 19 years old, 5 years later, they're going to be a completely different person. If you don't believe me, just do this quick thought experiment. Imagine you dated a 19-year-old, let's say when they were 19 and you were 22. And let's say you only dated for 2 months. It was a short relationship. And then you broke up and you didn't see each other again for 5 years. You came back and saw them. You met 5 years later. I don't know. Met at a coffee shop, met at the grocery store. And you start talking to them. What do you expect? You probably expect, wow, you've changed so much. You're a totally different person. Conversely, what if you bump into them 5 years later and they're exactly the same? They haven't changed. Still, like mentally, emotionally, intellectually, in terms of they're still that 19-year-old you knew 5 years earlier. Wouldn't that be disturbing? Wouldn't that be disappointing? You walk away and think, wow, that girl hasn't changed at all, man. I knew her when she was 19 and now she's really a fully grown adult. And man, she's still playing the same video games or whatever. There was a girl I knew in high school. When we said this is a high school relationship, there was a girl I was involved with in high school. Like I can't even say we were dating or had a. It was high school. I mean, we were kids, and I bumped into her toward the end of university. And footnote here: whenever a Canadian tells you anecdotes about high school and university, we were all a year older than the Americans. The Canadian high school system used to be a year longer than the American system or the European system. So everyone was a bit more mature. So like me at the end of university, we were all old. Anyway, so I knew this girl in high school. I was involved with her back then. Let's say it was 5 years. Probably it was 4 years. I didn't see her. something like that. And then I bump into her in a bar. She was sitting in a... Oh, and by the way, I don't drink alcohol. And at that time already, for years, I hadn't drank alcohol. I was at a bar, and I bump into her with her best friend. And she still has the same best friend that she had in high school, right? Bump into her, and she's there. And they were drunk, and they were on, I think, mushrooms, hallucinogenic mushrooms. And so, she's like apologizing that she's high. She can't really be witty. She's scattered. She hasn't got her mind together and stuff. But she's the same person I knew when she hasn't grown up at all. She hasn't matured at all. And, already at that time, and then afterwards we talked on the phone, she was trying to get into bed with me. And in some ways that's flattering, and in some ways that's disturbing, because you're sitting there like, I've changed so much. I've changed so much. Everyone else I've known over a period of just the last 2 or 3 years, during those 2 or 3 years, has changed so much. And here you are, you ain't changed. It's weird. If you get involved with someone who's 19 years old, you absolutely must expect them to profoundly change in the next 5 years. Guess what? If you get involved with someone who's 25 years old, it's possible they will profoundly change between age 25 and age 30. It's possible, and you have to be prepared for that. But it's not as inevitable. It's not as likely. I mean, how much have I changed in the last 5 years? The last 5 years of my life are completely documented here on YouTube. I've changed. I haven't changed that much. Judge for yourself. Right? How much are people going to change between age 35 and age 40 as opposed to between 19 and 24, something like this, okay? It's inevitable. Titanic Sinclair, older guy, got involved with a 19-year-old. There was fame involved, makes it harder, makes it worse. There was money involved, makes it harder, makes it worse. There was the artistic, creative process involved. You may not believe me, makes it harder, makes it worse. But fundamentally, Titanic Sinclair was a man who got involved with a 19-year-old girl, and she done changed. After he was with her for 5 years, he ended up attempting suicide, getting hospitalized. She turns around and puts him on blast, dumps it on the internet that he attempted suicide. She says all these bad things about him and cusses him out, and that's the end of the story. You may not know it, Titanic, but this is what you signed up for. The question I have to ask, morally, now, in the year 2020 and going forward is, what is the role of the crowd? If each of us is acting in our capacity as editors of a newspaper, each of us is acting in our own capacity as the authors of our own pathetic little gossip columns, whether they are on Facebook or on Twitter or here on YouTube, right? We are all editorializing on our own behalf. We are all authors on our own behalf, okay? What I'm worried about here is not the morality of a rock star who goes on the road and chooses to sleep around. I am sincerely worried about the morality of the braying crowd.